All right. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Denise Mullinax, and I'm with the California Dairy Research Foundation. And this morning, I'd like to welcome you all to this webinar that we're presenting titled Addressing Stress, Depression, and Suicide in California Dairy Families. So increasingly, we are seeing more honest discussion about stress and depression. More recently, even some courageous athletes and celebrities have spoken about their challenges and have really revealed that just about anyone can experience depression given enough stress. Certainly, current events have provided no shortage of stress for our farming community. So this morning, CDQAP, UC Agriculture and Natural Resources, and Colorado State University have partnered to bring you this for dairy producers, families, and the entire dairy community. We're very pleased to have Colorado State's own Dr. Bob Fetch with us this morning. Good morning, Bob. So just a little background on Dr. Bob. Dr. Bob grew up and was raised on a small dairy farm in Texas. He served over 32 years on the faculties of both University of Kentucky and Colorado State University, and has over 40 years that he's devoted himself to really knowing and understanding how to use the latest family life research to improve people's well-being. Since he retired from Colorado State University in 2011, he now does what he enjoys most, which is working with farm and ranch families to assist them in managing stress, anger, depression, and suicidal thinking, and really just helping to increase their overall quality of life. Simply put, Dr. Bob has far surpassed anyone else's experience and knowledge in these topics, and we're very delighted to have him with us this morning. So, Dr. Bob, if you'll play Vanna for just a couple minutes, just a couple of mechanics and logistical issues as we get started. Some of you, it may be your first time using the Zoom. And so let's go through where you can find support materials and how to ask questions. So next slide, Dr. Bob. So for those of you that are on your computer this morning, or perhaps maybe on your computer later in the day, if you go to the CDQAP's homepage at www.cdqap.org, over on the right-hand side, you'll see a link there for Dairy Mental Health Webinar. If you click on that link, you'll be able to access all of the slides that Dr. Bob is going to be using this morning, as well as several support materials there for you. In addition to that, next slide, please. During the webinar this morning, there's a couple of different ways that you can ask anonymous questions, should you want to do that. So again, if you're on your computer, you can use what's called the chat function. If you click down at the bottom of your screen, there it is. See where the little arrow points down to the bottom? There's a little bubble there, and below it, it says chat. If you click on that, you can use the chat function. If you actually click on that on your screen, you'll see that there's a drop-down menu. You want to click on only the host. That's where you want to send your questions. So click on the chat function and then click on only the host, and you can type your question in there. And then at different waypoints, Dr. Bob will ask Deanne and I, and we will share the questions that he can answer for the group, and you can do that anonymously. If you're joining the call or the webinar this morning via conference call line, or you're on your phone, you can also text anonymous questions to the following number, which is 209-585-6744. And that phone number is right now at the top of your screen. Again, 209-585-6744. So both of those methods will allow you, again, to ask anonymous questions. You'll basically send them in, and then at different points, Bob will cue us that he's ready for questions, and we will ask them on the group's behalf, and everyone can hear the answers. Okay? So with that, I'm going to actually turn it over to Dr. Bob. Thank you so much again for being with us this morning. We look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Denise. It's a pleasure to be with you. I really appreciate you joining us today for this very important and timely topic. I want to address today's presentation and dedicate it to my parents. Paul Joseph Fetch, he was born in 1918, died not too long ago in 2008 at the age of 90, and Marcella Teresa Fetch, 1924 to 1997. Thanks to my parents, their hard work with our dairy farm taught me how to work hard and how to be successful. I really appreciate Dad's immense dedication to record keeping, to DHIA, to artificial insemination, where he bred up one of the top 2 dairy herds in Cook County, Texas. And it was fun to learn from him about how he got so far with his life with only a 4th grade education. Thanks, Dad and Mom. So welcome to this presentation. Today what I want to do is cover 3 topics. I want to cover signs of stress, depression, and suicidal thinking. And that's very important because the better we are at recognizing those signs, first in ourselves, then in a family member, and then in others, the better we can act, to take action to help someone else who might be experiencing some troubled times. Second is, what can you and I do? And third is, why are these results important, especially now? Just to back up a second, I forgot to thank Dr. Michael Payne and Deanne Mayer, as well as Denise Molinax. All 3 of them worked hard, as well as did Jody, in making this possible today. As I go through today's presentation, I'd like all of you participants to think about 1 or 2 dairy farm family members that you know, because I'm going to ask you to spot signs and to recognize signs in those people. I'll refer to him or her, and I like to use the word herm, so it covers both him or her. And I'd like you to make notes of signs of stress and what you can do with that person as you move forward and after this workshop is over. So first of all, let's talk about some signs of stress, depression, and suicidal thinking. Well, as most of you know, working day in and day out in such highly stressful environments can contribute to high anxiety, depression, and suicidal thinking. And then experiencing high levels of fatigue, sleep deprivation, stress, anxiety, and depression probably contributes to ranchers and farmers being less safe around large animals like cattle or horses or bison and machinery, and therefore explains why farming and ranching are second only to mining in risk of accidents, disabilities, and fatalities. Well, from some research that was done a while back by NIOSH, the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, farming was identified way back then as one of the top 12 high-stress occupations. And they found that farm owners were second only to laborers in the rate of death for stress-related diseases. They looked at the death certificates of 22,000 Tennessee workers' health records, death certificates, hospital admissions, and mental health center admissions, and found that farm owners were among 12 categories of workers with high incidence of stress-related illnesses. And that was kind of around the time that I started looking at this whole problem that we have, and have learned a lot along the way from many of you and many other people like you, dairy farmers across the country. There was some research done among New Zealand dairy farmers. It was a little under 1,000, and identified the following as the top stressors that they experienced: time pressures, machinery failures, weather, and weather is one of those top stressors that I find among farmers and ranchers of all kinds, and then government policy. There were 1,015 New Zealand farmers in another study that identified increased workload, especially at peak times. And for farmers, that seems to be both at planting and harvesting, according to University of Kentucky research. Dealing with workers' compensation was another major stressor. Bad weather again. Complying with health and safety legislation was another stressor that they faced. In an Iowa study of 1,343 farm residents, these were the top stressors: death of a spouse, and all of us who have experienced that know how awful that can be. Death of a child is right underneath that, and then disabling injury of a family member or disabling injury to oneself. I'm the co-director of the Colorado Agri-Ability Project, and you have a California Agri-Ability Project. The Agri-Ability projects are federally funded, USDA NIFA funded projects in 20 states to help farmers and ranchers like dairy farmers who have some kind of a disability. Later on, I'll give you the phone number for your local California Agri-Ability project, or you can Google it too and find it, because people with a disability can be an additional risk for accidents, for secondary injuries, especially from dairy cattle or beef cattle. Another stressor in that Iowa study was foreclosure on a mortgage or loan, divorce, machinery breakdown during harvest. Well, I remember many times in the 13 years I went home to help my brother bring in the wheat harvest. That time during harvest was pretty rough sometimes. Loss of a crop to weather like hail or flooding, loss of crop to pests or disease is another stressor, and severe weather conditions. We've seen that lately in Nebraska and Missouri and in Kansas. There's a handout at your CDQ AP website that Deanne has posted for you, and it's called Farm and Ranch Family Stress and Depression, a checklist and guide for making referrals. I encourage all of you to make a copy of that for yourself and pass it around to families, members, and friends who might have some of those signs, because it has not only signs of stress, anger, and depression and suicidal thinking, but also resources that you can contact. At the end, you'll also have a nice list that Deanne and Denise made of California resources that are available to you. But this particular two-page handout you can make copies of and put in your offices and hand them out to anybody who might need them. Well, as economic stress increases, and that's especially true, I think, right now for many, many dairy farmers, as Michael has shared with me, the worse things get, the more likely you and I are to see a friend or family member get mad, angry, and blame others. And those are the four signs, stress, anger, depression, and suicide, that I want to cover today to be able to give you some information that you can use both with you, yourself, and your family members. What are some signs of high stress? You might notice in your family or someone else's family kind of a change in routines, maybe an increase in illness, maybe the appearance of the farmstead or the dairy farm declines, maybe the fences don't look so good anymore, maybe the roofs are starting to get rustier than ever. Care of the livestock might decline. Sometimes you see some problems with the livestock, and the number of farm or ranch accidents increases, and children show signs of distress. You know, it's been interesting to me that whenever a couple seems to have some kind of increase in arguments or fights with each other and all, many times children, especially those under about 8 years old, will exhibit some signs of behavioral problems or stress. And maybe many times it's the school teacher that notices that a daughter or son of a dairy farm family is acting differently. They're a little more edgy, they're a little angrier, a little short-tempered, and sometimes you'll see a sign or hear somebody, maybe a teacher, call and say, is something going wrong with your child? And it's really an expression of what's going on between the couple when they experience severe signs of stress, often due to economic issues. Some physical signs are headaches, ulcers, backaches, eating irregularities, that is, eating more or eating less. In other words, gaining some weight or losing some weight. Sleep disturbances, frequent sicknesses, and exhaustion. Now, some of these symptoms you'll also see when someone has the flu. So you have to use your common sense. You know, if this person is hacking and coughing, some of these headaches and backaches and eating irregularities may be associated with a virus or something like that. So you got to look at the context of things to make a diagnosis here of whether it has to do with prolonged stress. Some other signs are panic attacks and heart palpitations, sweating, trembling or shaking, shortness of breath, chest pain or discomfort, difficulty swallowing, nausea or abdominal distress, and lightheadedness, derealization or depersonalization. These are from my good friend Mike Roseman from Harlan, Iowa, who is in my opinion, the psychologist, national psychologist farmer. He's the one that many farmers and ranchers call when they are in severe stress. And the Diagnostic Statistical Manual talks about these. People who have had a full-blown panic attack know what these symptoms feel like. Most of us know what fainting and dizziness feel like. Maybe you've experienced this. I certainly have. And I've fainted a time or two, so I know something about this. Derealization is feeling so distressed that one's voice sounds hollow and everything seems unreal. Depersonalization feels like one is outside of him or herself and one does not feel connected with what is going on around them. Derealization and depersonalization are kind of like mild hallucinations. When experiencing too much distress, people can faint. It's a protective mechanism to preserve life, because when one is unconscious, the body can put all its resources into basic life functions, such as keeping the heart going and breathing automatically. Those are kind of important. So if you have those kinds of experiences, those, or some family member is, those are some of the things that you might notice that this person is experiencing high stress levels. Well, economic stress is related to personal and family stress. Back in the mid-'80s, and maybe some of our participants today were in dairy farming back then, some interdisciplinary research examined the correlations between stress and depression in last year income, debt, total assets, liabilities, and overall financial outlook. And what we learned in that is not just the amount of money or debts that we have, it's what it means to us that makes the big difference. I want to talk a little bit about that. We did a study here in Colorado at that time. We randomly selected 300 Colorado ranchers and farmers from the state ag census and 300 from the state of Wyoming. And we asked them a whole series of questions. We asked them about their stress levels, about their depression levels, and we had 5 questions. I was working with ag economists. I'm a Family Life extension specialist, and they were ag economist extension specialists. And so we asked them 5 questions in a row after we asked about their stress and depression levels. And the 5 questions were, when you think about last year, what was your overall income last year, your family income last year? And secondly, what was your overall family debt last year? And then the third question was, as you look at your overall economic situation, what is your net worth? And fourth, what is your overall debt? Those 4 questions. And then the 5th question was, as you think about your overall financial situation, how does it look to you from dismal, 0, to 7, outstanding? What was especially interesting, especially to my ag economist friends, is what there was a low correlation between the answers to the first 4 questions and the stress and depression levels. They were stunned by that. It was the 5th question that made all the difference. In other words, when I look at my overall, when I think about my overall financial situation, how does it look to me from dismal 0 to outstanding 7, that one had a very high correlation with stress levels and depression levels. And we had some people who only made $35,000 last year. And they said, well, we're at about a 5 or a 6. You know, we're doing pretty well. And we had some that had $1 million last year. And they said, oh, ours are not so good. They're about a 2 or a 3. So it's what's in our head, what's between your ears, you know, that brain, that perception that you have about what's going on in your life that is key to how you're going to cope well with this. That's also been verified in much of the family stress research when we find that people that go through tough times, whether it's death of a family member, a disability, or loss of the family farm, it's the meaning that people give to that is key to how well they're going to be in 3 to 5 years. Well, I want to talk about anger now. You know, probably most of us get angry at some times, and especially us men, I think, may not know the difference between these different levels. Let's say, for example, we're at a low level of anger, which I call annoyed here. Say, I'm annoyed that we were late on getting on this webinar today. Uh, and or maybe it's a little higher than I'm aggravated that you slowed me down and that I couldn't get on here on time. I'm irritated that this is the third time this week you slowed me down so I couldn't get on this webinar. I'm frustrated that it's happened again. I'm angry at you for what you've done. I'm furious and I'm enraged. You hear those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 levels of anger? Those are important for each of us to know at what level we are whenever we are annoyed, aggravated, irritated, frustrated, angry, furious, and enraged, because the more we know about what level we are, the more we can ask for what we want from the person with whom we are angry. It's a good thing for us men especially, and I'm not trying to just pick on us men, but I kind of know us men a little better sometimes than I do my wife and daughter. We, though, sometimes screen out how angry we are. And sometimes we men don't know we're angry until we're up here in the top 3 levels, angry, furious, and enraged. And then we're really angry. And so our wives and daughters run from us or try to run from us when we're there. It's better in families to catch our anger at the lowest level we can, to say, I'm irritated with you right now for not finishing the chores like you always do. And what I want for you is to go out there and feed those cows and make sure they have enough water. So it's recognizing and saying what it is we're angry about. When I feel angry, or when I see you not finishing the chores, then I feel angry. And what I want is for you to go back out there and feed those animals right now. And so it's when I see or hear or something like that, then I feel aggravated, irritated, frustrated, angry. And what I want is, and ask for what you want, because you might get it. So those are some steps and some strategies I recommend dealing with anger. The lower the monthly income, the higher the chronic depression level. Gilmer and al. In his study found this particular connection. Many farmers and ranchers struggle with depression. It's not clear whether they experience lower or higher levels of depression and other mental health or behavioral health issues, as does the general population. Some studies find a little higher, some studies find a little lower, some studies find about the same. In one study, Iowa farm men were more likely to experience depression if within the previous year they had done any of the following: lost something of sentimental value, experienced substantial income decline, gone deeply into debt, faced legal problems, or experienced an increase in health problems. In a North Dakota study, farmers' depression levels were almost twice that of other rural populations in the past. See, this is an example in which farmers' depression levels were higher. In Colorado, a study of 872 farmers and spouses found that those more likely to report high depressive symptoms were female, in poor physical health, and unmarried, and those who lived on the farm and were no longer involved in farm work. If your family is kind of like mine, farmers don't really retire, they just keep on keeping on. Depression was associated with high-risk behaviors such as failure to remain calm around livestock, not reading instruction manuals or safety precautions, and not using shields on moving equipment parts. And as probably all of you know, the power takeoff is a very dangerous thing, and we need to keep those shields on there and shut the engine down, shut the power takeoff off before we dismount. Being depressed puts farmers at risk. Depression leads to increased occupational injury among farmers in a study by my colleague Grisso in Virginia and his colleagues. Being depressed puts farmers at risk. Depressed farmers are at a 2.7 times greater risk for falls than farmers who do not report depression. So if we're depressed, we're more likely to miss that step or to not pay attention to the uneven ground that we're walking over. Male principal operators with high levels of depressive symptoms have a threefold risk of farm work-related injuries. So that's why I think it's so important to recognize the signs of depression and know when I'm experiencing it. I've been depressed at different times in my life, and I've also learned how to deal with that and how to move on from that. Many men forget about it or don't pay attention to those things. In my experience, more often women know and recognize those signs than do us men. Some researchers found a relationship between exposure to pesticides and high levels of depression among Colorado farmers and ranchers. My colleagues, Dr. Loran Stallons, is the one who published this particular very interesting finding about the relationship of pesticides and depression. Given the high rates of depression that farmers experience, it's no surprise that farmers' suicide rates are also high. And I've got 3 sources here you can look at to see that particular relationship. And my good friend Mike Roseman says, we've seen progress in reduced numbers of physical fatalities and injuries in agriculture, thanks to the efforts of OSHA and Extension farm safety programs. But we've not seen progress in reducing behavioral health issues like suicide, especially among older white men. Here's one of the studies by Teasman and her colleagues that shows what I'm talking about. What you're going to see here is that the suicide rate, this is per million in this particular graph, 10 per million of farmers and ranchers was more than double the size of the next highest, which is protective service. People like sheriffs and police officers, etc., and farming, fishing people and logging people here that were just a little less than half of what farmers and ranchers were. And there have been other studies that have also verified this same problem. And one of them is Dr. Wendy Ringenberg and her co-authors had an article in May 2017, Journal of Rural Health. What she found is that her findings are consistent with similar conclusions derived from other sources, like this one from Teasman. The Department of Labor data has not been examined in the fashion that she did it. Ringenberg's analysis also examined homicide. You know, we're talking suicide mostly today, but for a moment I want to talk a bit about homicide, which revealed that the frequency of homicide in the agricultural workplace ranks in the middle of the occupations which were evaluated. Farmer suicides in the workplace were most common in the West. And you in California and me here in Colorado are in that West where farm suicides were the most common in Ringenberg's doctoral thesis. Farmer homicides were most common in the South, followed closely by the West, but lagged considerably in the Midwest and Northeast. So we need to watch for both suicide and homicide among our friends and neighbors. Well, you're probably thinking, well, and I forgot to mention, be sure and ask your questions at any time. Use that chat method that Deanne was talking about, or raise your hand. Let them know what your questions are, and they'll get them to me. And one of the questions you might have is, well, what is it that contributes to the risk of suicide for farmers and ranchers? Well, these were found in Teasman and Conda and Hartley, etc.'s et al.'s article in American Journal of Preventive Medicine. Potential for financial loss, chronic physical illness like with muscular sclerosis or maybe with arthritis and maybe post-polio syndrome, social isolation, work-home imbalance, barriers and unwillingness to seek behavioral health treatment. Okay, now I particularly want to say this to you farmers, the dairy farmers that are among our participants. And I especially want to thank you for talking with us today and for listening to what we have. I suspect that some of you may be like my brother. My brother, who farms 10 farms in North Texas, will spend good hard-earned money to pay a veterinarian to save the life of a mother cow who's having trouble delivering a calf. But he hates more than anything to spend $1 on himself unless he's really hurting bad, and then he'll go to the emergency room because he doesn't have insurance, health insurance. So I have a question for you. Aren't you worth more than a mother cow? Ask your spouse, ask your daughter, son, mother, or father. Ask them, am I worth more than a mother cow? And I'll bet you that they'd say, yes, you are worth way more than a mother cow. So please, how about spending or investing some of your hard-earned money on you? How about reaching out if you're depressed or suicidal? How about reaching out to your doctor, to your minister or priest or counselor and behavioral health therapist to ease your pain? Remember, pain is not always obvious. You know, we may hide our pain from everybody we can, but we can be hurting like hell inside. Hear me when I say you are worth it. Remember, if you don't take care of yourself, no one will. So some additional factors that may contribute to this risk of suicide for dairy farm families and other farmers and ranchers include depression due to a chronic pesticide exposure, increased access to lethal means. In studies that have done about what methods farmers and ranchers use, the two leading methods of suicide for farmers are firearms and hanging. A lot of times access to mental health services can be limited in rural settings. Finding time to leave the farm to receive medical or behavioral health care can be a challenge. In one of the families I helped here about 3 months ago, the closest therapist I could find was 70 miles away. That's quite a commitment to drive 70 miles to get behavioral health counseling, but it's worth it. Why do farmers and ranchers commit suicide at higher rates? Well, one good thing is it's not increased levels of mental health issues. Farmers and ranchers, I saw a bumper sticker one time I just loved. It said, legalize gambling. Farmers do it all the time. I kind of think that's true. It certainly was with my dad and mom. They would gamble that we're going to get rain next year when they put the wheat and the barley and the sorghum in the ground. They just gambled that it would come. It may have to do with demands of family farms, the culture of farming communities, shortage of healthcare professionals in rural farming communities, high accessibility to firearms, occupational stress from especially among dairying where you're milking 2 or 3 times a day, and dadgum, those cows don't ever take a vacation, do they? Financial difficulties, family problems, and retirement is a trying transition for most farmers. Well, the question is, why are 3 out of 4 suicides across the nation and here in Colorado committed by men rather than women, when in China 2 out of 3 suicides are committed by women? I think David and Brannon have it pretty well right on the mark when my colleagues and I look at why is it that 3 out of 4 suicides in America are committed by men. We think it has to do with the scripting we do to our little boys, when our little boy versus how we script our little girls. We tell our little boys, no sissy stuff. Men are expected to distance themselves from anything feminine. So let's say you had twins, and they're 5 years old, they're boys, one's a boy and one's a girl, and they both fall off their tricycles. So what do we say to our little girl? Oh, honey, you got a boo-boo. Let's go get a Band-Aid and put it on there. And what do we say to our little boy? Probably, cowboy it up. What's the matter with you? Don't be a sissy. And we also tell them, be a big wheel. Men should be occupationally or financially successful. Be a sturdy oak. Men should be confident and self-reliant. 4th, give them hell. Men should do what is necessary to make it. And I've added a 5th one. When you're hurting, be a man. Keep it inside and tell no one. I think these 5 messages that we give our little boys, and we usually don't in our little girls, although I'm seeing more in my workshops now of parents that say, yes, I'm telling my little girl the same thing, to be a cowgirl. Come on, cowgirl it up. These are dangerous. They're dangerous because they don't recognize how important it is for you and me as parents, as mothers and fathers, to parent to our children that we cry sometimes too, that we feel sad, that we feel angry, that we feel stressed, that we feel depressed. We need to model that to our children and show them how we then deal in healthy ways with our stress, anger, depression, and suicide. And I urge you to script your sons and your daughters in a similar way, to urge them to get help when they need it. It's okay. We get professional help for our tractors and for our combines and for our cars with those complicated computers, but we don't get help for ourselves. Isn't that kind of silly? Because if we don't take care of ourselves, there isn't going to be a dairy farm in the future. You and your families are the most important resources on that whole operation. And if we don't invest some money and some time in each other, how are we going to make it? If you look at that handout, the checklist and guide for making referrals, you will find these symptoms there. And I encourage you to go to the website and print those out for yourselves. Now, as I was preparing this, Mike and Deanne and Diane asked me to try to find dairy farm families California hotlines, and I didn't find any. However, there is a national call-in hotline 24/7 where you can call 1-800-SUICIDE, which is 1-800-784-2433. But at the end of this workshop, Deanne and Denise are going to show you or tell you about the wonderful website, the wonderful local resources in California that are in the same counties as many of the dairy farms in California. So now, remember when I started, I asked you to think of someone you know, a dairy farmer who you might think is depressed or suicidal. Would you on your notepad now please jot down some signs that you see in him or her, that tell you that person may be stressed out, depressed, or suicidal. You might call Herm Robin. So we got both, either male or female. So what signs, make a note please there, what signs you see that you recognize. And if there are any questions, now might be a good time to entertain those about signs and symptoms of stress and depression.
We have none in the chat box here.
Okay, thank you, Deanne. We'll go on then. Maybe there'll be questions later.
We have none from the phone line either, or the text line.
Thank you, Denise.
Oh, there is a question that's coming up at the bottom of the screen. It says, do you see telemedicine? Let's see, do you see telemedicine as an option farmers would use to access therapy?
Would a farmer use telemedicine? I think some farmers will. Yes, if that's set up and where they can go and maybe use Skype or maybe Zoom like this, or wherever the clinic is that has telemedicine, of course, use it. Use all the healthy resources you can find to be able to address signs of stress and depression. And telemedicine could be one of those that people will use. Sure, let's try it. Okay, let's talk next on the checklist. What are some signs of depression? Appearance. If you see someone who's kind of unkempt when they're usually not so unkempt, if they have unhappy feelings like sadness, depression, maybe a lot of fatigue, negative thinking, where they keep bringing up negative things. Boy, things are really tough. I don't know how anything's going to work out. Things are sure looking bleak. And they keep saying things like that. Reduced activity and pleasure in usual activities, like in eating or in sleeping. People problems, physical problems, guilt and low self-esteem. Sometimes these can be signs of depression that we can observe in a person or friend, a family member. Sadness, inability to experience genuine pleasure. Significant weight loss, not due to dieting or gain, about 5% of body weight per month is considered a bad sign. Or being depressed for 2 weeks or more. Excessive sleep and or middle or late night insomnia. Now I want to differentiate something here. If I wake up at night because I'm working on a particular project or a workshop or some kind of a stressful situation, if I find myself thinking about that situation, what I find is helpful for me is I go ahead and get up out of bed, go to my desk and write it down, and because I want to let the paper remember it in the morning. And usually there are solutions, and when I wake up I have solutions in my head that I want to get down on paper and remember for the next morning rather than forget about it. So I write it down and then say, now paper, you remember that I'm going to go to sleep. And I go back to bed and I go to sleep and let the paper remember it, because I know that paper will still be there in the morning. But if it's frequent insomnia where you're worried and depressed and can't seem to get solutions to things, that might be an important sign to tell your physician about, or your minister or your priest or your rabbi. Feeling lethargic or agitated, loss of energy. feeling worthless or inappropriate guilt, and just can't concentrate anymore and gets the same project finished. Preoccupied with negatives, or recurrent thoughts of suicide and how I'm going to kill myself. These can all be clear signs of severe depression. Now, would you think again of Robin, that person you're thinking of, and jot down, how depressed are you? And you can ask this question of a person when you say, you know, Tom, you sound depressed to me, and you look like you've been kind of sad and kind of down. You look sad. You look like you're not feeling very happy these days. And I'm wondering if you're depressed. How depressed are you? 0 to 10. 0, no depression. 10, high depression. And most people can give me a number there. And if they're 7, 8, 9, and 10, then be sure and hear them. Listen to them. Wow, sounds like you are really down. Sounds like you are really depressed. Tell me about it. And then sit there and listen to their story. Because if they tell you and give you a clue that they are depressed, that means that they are asking for help. That's how you need to hear that. If they say, oh, the government regulations are terrible, and the prices are so low for our milk, I don't know how we're going to make it, and I'm just depressed. And then you can ask them, how depressed are you, 0 to 10? And if they're 7, 8, 9, 10, especially pay close attention to that. And then I'm going to go into more later of last lines here. If you hear those especially, we're going to go on with how do you make a good, effective referral. So I hope you've written down something here in terms of how depressed they are. And are there any questions at this time, Denise and Deanne?
I'm not seeing any.
We have not received any on the phone text line either, Bob.
Okay, thank you. We'll go on then. Let's talk about some suicide red flags. Who is most at risk of suicide? Take a look at this. What I did was I created an age line graph here that you're going to see. And what you see here is 4 lines. The bottom one has to do with black females. Their highest suicide rate is at about age 15 to 21, 22 or so, when it gets up to about 4 per 100,000. Keep in mind that the national average is 14 per 100,000. So they're at about 4 per 100,000 given this graph over here. Next in line are the white females, and their suicide rates peak at age 45 to 50. And in hundreds of groups that I've asked the women who are in my groups, why do you think white women's suicide rates are highest right here at 45 to 54 years old? Invariably, they'll tell me a menopause, empty nest, things like that, particularly if they've spent their years before that taking care of babies and infants and toddlers and preteens and teens, and the kids are moving on. They're going on as they should, and the nest is empty. That seems to be the highest, most difficult suicidal time for white women. Now let's look at black males. Their suicide rates peak here at about 21 per 100,000, which is, about half again as big as 14 as the national average of suicide rates. 15 to about 25 or so is the worst time for them. Now look at white males. Holy moly, here they get up to 31 per 100,000 at the age of 25, and then they go up to about 35 here at about age 50, and then there's a drop, and then look what happens here at about age 70, 75 on up. They go up to about 55 per 100,000. Which would be what? 3 to 4 times that high rate of the national average. I want to tell you one story that when I do these workshops, invariably at the break or afterwards, somebody will come up and tell me a story about a family member of their suicide family. And one story that one guy told me was that the guy had not heard from his friend, and I'll call him Gene, had not heard from Gene in a while, and he wondered what happened to him, and he was wondering that just as he saw in the paper one of those pre-obituary notes that say a funeral is pending, and he saw that Gene had died and the funeral was happening. So he called another friend and asked about it, and the other friends, he asked, what happened to Gene? And he said, oh, you haven't heard? And he says, no. He says, well, you know, his wife died last year, and then this year he lost the farm. And so he went into the gun shop to buy a handgun, and he bought a handgun, and the 21-year-old that was selling the guns to him said, you want to buy a box of shells? He said, only need one. And the 21-year-old missed it. He said, I can't sell you one shell. I got to sell you a whole box. So he bought the whole box, went home and used one, and ended his life. That's one of those last lines that I'm going to talk about further in a little bit. We need to pay attention to those things, those lines that make the hair on the back of your neck go up. And because those can be a sign the person is thinking about suicide. And then we can ask them, are you thinking about suicide? Are you thinking about hurting yourself? And we can ask, do you have a plan? And if they have a well thought out plan, yes, I've got a gun and I'm going to put it right where, and they show you where, and they're going to blow themselves out. You need to get those people to an emergency room right away, to their doctor, to a physician, somebody who can take action and help them. But the point I wanted you to see here is the high risk of white males over age 65, 70 or so. When they lose their spouse and when they lose their meaning, and the meaning about their work, and I'll lose the dairy, etc. Pay attention. They are at high risk. So being an older white male with risk increasing with age, here in Colorado, half the suicide dates are by white males 35 years plus. Work problems, unemployment, a third who commit suicide are unemployed at the time of their death here. The risk of suicide death increases among older white men, especially high for 75 years plus, especially after they lose their spouse and their dairy farm. Most are white and not married. Now, I created this slide I actually put this slide in here because I wanted you to see where California as a whole is in terms of suicide rates. Now, when you look beyond dairy farmers to your entire population in California, in 2017, the latest year for which suicide mortality rates are available, California's suicide rate was 10.5 per 100,000. 10.5 per 100,000. That's below the United States average of 14.0. And over here you see quintiles, and what that means is a fifth of the data are with this darker red, a fifth of the data are in this red-orange, a fifth of the data are in light orange, and then a fifth of the data are in this kind of yellow color, and a fifth are in this lighter yellow color. And California is in the lowest quintile of data overall for mortality by suicide in 2017, the latest years for which data are available. Now, notice this, that the reddish states here are mostly in the mountain states. And I have slides like this for back 30 years. And again and again and again, the mountain states are the highest. And then these will pop up for a year or two and then slip down a little further. So it's out here in the mountain states that we have the highest suicide rates. Ours here in Colorado right now is 20.3, which is, it's almost double that of what you have in California. So I want you to see that over in your overall deaths, but I would predict that your suicide rates for dairy farmers and other farmers is probably much higher than the state average of 10.5. If you get these slides later and you want to look at them, you can click on your state or any other state, and this is an active website that you can check for any state for their suicide mortality rates. I created this slide for you to see how your California suicide rates compare with the national average since 1980. This is the national average, the red line, and what I want to ask you is, look here. The suicide rate went down right here to 99 to 2000, and that's the lowest it's ever been. Why do you think it went down there and why it was the lowest at that point. If we could, I'd love to hear your guesses. Many people say financial downturn, which it was not. Many people say bad weather. It was not. It had to do with the introduction by psychiatrists and psychopharmacologists with highly effective antidepressant medications. As more and more people began to realize that they could get help from an antidepressant medication, fewer and fewer adults experienced as high of suicide rates. But it has gone back up now, so now we're at about, on this slide, about a 14, well, that's what it is, 14 per 100,000 is what the national average is now. Now, look at California's. You all have done something great out there. I don't know what it is. I'd like to know. So if you've got answers, send it to me on the chat line. Your highest suicide rate since 1981 was right here in 1982, when it was a little above 15 per 100,000. It went down here in 2001, was the lowest, to about 8 or 9 per 100,000. And now it's up to a little above 10. Well, as I said, we had it at 10.5 per 100,000 in 2017. So y'all are doing a lot of things that are good. When I've asked different California Extension Family Life specialists, they say that one of the differences is you all have a lot of immigrants coming in, and they are often very optimistic, and life is a heck of a lot better in California than it was wherever they were. And that probably changes your statistics so that you keep much lower than the U.S. and then Colorado and Wyoming. You can see how much higher our suicide rates are. So I wanted to share that with you. Now let's talk about some last lines of suicidal intent. One time, about 20 years ago, I was here in my office and I got a call from a county agent in Extension who told me about a situation he had just learned from one of the Extension families that he had talked with. So it was in southern Colorado, and I won't tell their name, but I'll tell you the story. He said that two farmers were in the cafe for breakfast, and as they were making their orders, putting in their orders in this cafe, a friend of theirs was at the door, and they waved him in, said, "Come on, join us." And he sat down with the two of them, and they asked him, and I'll call him Henry. Henry, how you doing? And notice how he answered. He answered like this. He said, "Oh, fine." What do you notice about how he says it and what his head does, the nonverbal? Notice the "oh, fine" is what we call flat affect. That's a sign of depression. When someone talks like this without much energy and their voice doesn't modulate much and go up and down much, that's what psychiatrists and physicians call flat affect. Means their affect, their emotion, isn't very energized. It's pretty sad and pretty flat. That's one of the signs of high depression. And the other thing, "Oh, fine. How are you doing, Henry?" "Oh, fine." He shook his head no. You'll notice that nonverbal doesn't lie. Pay attention to the nonverbal because you'll often get clues to what's really going on. And this person said, "I'm thinking about calling it quits." And so they immediately said, "What do you mean? What are you calling it quits?" "Well, I got a gun at home, and then after this breakfast, I'm going home calling it quits." One of the guys went to the phone booth. They had phone booths those days rather than cell phones, and called the wife, the person's wife, and she came and got him to a physician immediately. And today that guy is still farming and is doing okay because of his friends recognizing the signs of high suicidal risk and got him help. You can do that too, people. Another line is, "Maybe my family would be better off without me." Sometimes people think that by their dying and getting the life insurance policy, if they can fake it and make it look like it's a non-suicide, maybe the family would get 100,000 or $1 million or something like that, and they'd be better off. Another is, "Let's have a last cigarette together." Our daughter, when she was in college at University of Colorado, encountered this, where the guy said to his roommate, "Let's have a last cigarette together." And the roommate didn't catch it. He didn't say, "What do you mean a last cigarette together?" That's what he should have asked, but he didn't. And he left with our daughter and 3 other friends, and they went to have breakfast. When they came back, the roommate was dead by a gunshot. Another was the one that I told you earlier, the guy who called about his friend who had died, who said went to the gun shop, and the guy who's selling them says, "Want to buy a box of shells with your new handgun? Only need one." If you hear anything like this, perk up your ears and ask about it. It says, "What do you mean you want to buy only one? Are you thinking about suicide?" And ask, and look them straight in the eye and ask for an answer, and act like you have all year to listen to their story, because they need someone to talk with if they're giving you a clue. It's the ones who don't give you any clue that there's nothing you or I can do anything about it, because they've already made up their mind, they've already created a plan, and they're going to do their best not to let you know beforehand. So do what you can to pay attention to these last lines. And if you know of a last line you've heard of, please jot it down. And if you wouldn't mind emailing it to me, Dean and Deanne can tell you my email. It's robert.fetch@coloradostate.edu. I'll show it to you on the last slide again, but you can email it to me. If you're willing to share it with me, I'd love to be able to use it and tell the story. So from your experience, what are some last lines that got your attention? Please jot them down. If you can, send them to me. Now I want to move on to what can you and I do. We've talked about signs of stress, anger, and depression and suicidal intent. Let's go to what can you and I do. First of all, listen. Use your ears and your mind and your heart and your soul and listen to that person very well. Hear their story. Hear the sounds of depression and suicidal thinking. Don't just ask, "How are you?" but "How are you doing, George? You must be going through hell right now with the low milk prices and the high cost of feed. Tell me about it." Really connect with them, preferably one-on-one. Usually that works better, particularly with those 3 out of 4 that commit suicide, the men. It works with women too, the 1 out of 4 that commits suicide on average in the United States. Really connect with anyone who is suicidal, women and men, children, teenagers, adults, older people. Empathize with them. That means feel with them. Boy, I know what you mean about how tough it is right now and how we've got to tighten our belt again. Be mindful of their well-being. Now, would you think again of that person you're thinking of? What can you say and do? Would you jot down some ideas on your notepad there that you can use by talking with them as soon as you see them? Deanne and Denise, do we have any more questions?
I'm not seeing any in the chat. Just a reminder to folks, if you want to type in a question, you hover over the bottom of your screen till you see the word chat, and then you click on that and you can type to the host.
Dr. Bob, I also have not received any on the phone text line.
Okay, then we'll go on. So what can you and I do? Watch for subtle signs that something is not right. Don't wait for the right time to reach out. Do it now. If you have any suspicion at all, it won't hurt to ask. I know of no example in which someone asked someone else that caused them to commit suicide. If you do it in a caring way. Now, if you're in the wrong place, you just say you're in church and and you blabber it out and you say, "Tom, you look like hell. What's wrong with you? Are you suicidal?" Now, that's kind of the wrong time. Wait till you're one-on-one where he, or if it's a woman, where you can ask them, where you're out of earshot from other people, and ask them then, are you depressed? Are you suicidal? Connect them with local professional behavioral health therapists. Connect them with a family member. Connect with a family physician, a veterinarian, maybe a milk or feed hauler, an agribility team member, an extension agent, a rural banker. And when you get on the website, when you get back to the website there, you're going to find lots more information that Michael and Deanne and Denise have put up there. And this is for all kinds of people who might be able to notice something. In many examples, it's been a milk hauler that recognized some signs that there was trouble. Or maybe a feed deliverer or a hay deliverer, somebody who had a connection with that farm family. Might be a neighbor or a relative. Well, where do you find behavioral health therapists? These are 4 national websites for therapists, for psychologists, for marriage and family therapists, for mental health therapists. You can click on these, and this whole slide set's going to be available to you later on through the website that they put up for you. And you can click on them and type in a zip code and say within 25 miles or 50 miles, etc., of any zip code in the country, and you can find therapists that are near you that you can either call upon for yourself, or you can refer someone to. These are again on that Farm and Ranch Family Stress and Depression Checklist and Guide that I've referred to 3 times before this. So what are signs of suicidal thinking? Anxiety or depression, withdrawal or isolation, helplessness, especially hopelessness. When someone is hopeless, that's a really clear sign that someone is in trouble. Previous suicidal attempts can give you a clue too. And do you have a plan? Yes, I do. I've got a gun and I know how to use it. Cries for help, where someone gives you a clue where it sounds like they're thinking about killing themselves. What's the common cold of modern psychology? It's depression. What is the best, most effective cure for depression? A combination of taking good care of yourself, exercise, counseling, and medication. Those 4, with most cases, that will help a lot. Those 4 things that people can do. So if someone has symptoms of depression for 2 weeks or more, it's a good time to be able to get help and get counseling and exercise and medication. That would be an antidepressant medication. Ask your physician, tell them about your situation, and see what she or he recommends about which might be the best for you, and try it for a while. And if one doesn't work, they've got others. Get a different one that's better. Treat them with respect, with sincerity and honesty, by listening and hearing their pain and worry, not by pitying them, and by caring. Don't say, man, what is wrong with you? Don't you know you're going to hell if you kill yourself? Do not say that. Please do not, because that will just lead them to more guilt and more depression, and they're not going to tell you any more clues after you do that. That is just really the wrong thing to do. Instead, respect them, care about them, listen and hear their pain and their worry. I hear how sad you are, how depressed you are. Tell me more. Again, you see the checklist. Well, where can we find research-based family life fact sheets? You can go to the Colorado State website that I have here on the slide, and you're going to have these. Some of these will be on the internet website that they're going to have for you later. Ranching and farming with family members. You know, sometimes it can be challenging ranching with your sons and daughters and your parents and your grandchildren and all. There can be some challenges. Well, I wrote this particular fact sheet back when I was an extension family life specialist here, bringing together the best research about what works for ranch and farm families. So you may want to Google Colorado State and print that out for yourself. Farming and ranching, health hazard or opportunity is another one I wrote. Another one is managing stress during tough times. You can Google that one as well. You can Google any of these. And if they're useful for your family, then please use them, or for someone else. Youth suicide is another one that my colleagues wrote. Another one is making decisions and coping well with drought. 10 tips for successful family meetings. Hopefully your family, if you're intergenerational in the dairy farm, you probably have 2 or 3 generations working together. I recommend that you have family meetings at least every month where you deal with family issues before they become big-time problems. And here I've summarized the 10 best tips that I know of for successful family meetings. Dealing with couples anger has been a popular one too. Because, you know, like it or not, even though you might have been married as long as my wife and I, 44 and a half years, we still get angry at each other sometimes. We need to know some healthy ways to deal with our anger. Children's anger and tantrums. This is my most popular fact sheet. If you've got children around the age of 2 or 3, you might want to know how normal that is, as they're so frustrated. How can I use words to say what I want to say when I don't have the words to say it? So I just get all frustrated and angry. So yeah, if you have a little one or a grandchild or somebody, you may want to see this particular fact sheet. If you're unsure about what to do, refer. So what to do next? Recognize signs of high stress, anger, depression, and suicidal thinking. Take action. Find out about what local resources are available, and that's going to be on the website here in a little bit when we finish up. Check your yellow pages in your phone book under counselors, or call 1-800-SUICIDE, 784-2433. They're open 24/7 with a live trained therapist professional on the other end to talk with you to help you find local resources for you, your family member, or a friend or neighbor. They're the same 4 websites I showed you earlier. So the third thing I want to go on to now is, why are these results important, especially now? First of all, I want to talk about FARSAN, Farm and Ranch Stress Assistance Network, and AgriAbility. FARSAN is the Farm and Ranch Stress Assistance Network. It can help distressed farmers and their families and save lives if it was available. Now, my friend Mike Roseman from Harlan, Iowa, who is the national farm behavioral health therapist, in my opinion, he wrote about this, in which during the mid-'80s, he worked with 7 states, Iowa, Kansas, Minnesota, Nebraska, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Wisconsin. They had a farmer-friendly telephone hotline and website, and they offered free confidential telephone counseling 24/7 to callers and emailers, as well as up to 5 prepaid counseling sessions from licensed behavioral health care professionals with a farm background experience working with farmers. And what they found for these 2 years was hotline telephone responders referred over 10,000, almost 11,000 individuals, couples, or families involved in agriculture in the 7 states for professional behavioral health services. And the rate of farm suicide did not increase during the mid-'80s, which is phenomenal, given how high it was in England and in Colorado, and maybe in your state, I don't know. But during the mid-'80s, that was a really tough time, which is about as bad as we're going into now, it seems. So FARSAN worked there with Mike Roseman. 93% reported their services were helpful, and they would recommend that people involved in agriculture obtain similar services if needed. Many stressed farm and ranch people could benefit from an employee assistance program like the Farm and Ranch Stress Assistance Network. If you have hired workers on your dairy, and if you have maybe intergenerational, 2 or 3 generations, you may want to think further about this kind of a thing. So that's with FARSAN. And what happened was, in the Farm Bill that President Trump signed in December, there was at that time, before that, it was $10 million per year was allocated. But I just learned last week that in the compromise committee between the Senate and the House, they cut it down to $2 million, which I am sad about, because it only means 40,000 per state if they divide it up among all 50 states. And we need a lot more than that to address the serious problem. But it's a start. It's a start, and we can do some things with that. I'm not sure that we can develop a hotline in every one of 50 states to do it, but we can do what we can, adding on to what is already in California and other states. Now I want to talk about AgriAbility. That's the federally funded project under USDA NIFA that funds states to formulate a team that assists farmers and ranchers, especially dairy farmers, who have some kind of a disability. It doesn't have to be the most notable one where you're in a wheelchair, or maybe you're a quadriplegic. You might have a hearing problem. You might have arthritis. You might have you might have some vision problems, or you might have arthritis or something else. Contact your California AgriAbility project, because what we found, I head up a 14-state study in AgriAbility looking at how effective are we at increasing mental behavioral health levels. In our latest article just published, we found that a group of 269 AgriAbility participants' mental behavioral health levels improved significantly at the 0.001 level, as compared with a group of 99 people that had disabilities and farmers and ranchers that didn't have AgriAbility. They did not improve. We had 240 in the AgriAbility group, and what you see here is the quality of life levels increased 26% in our AgriAbility group, while the quality of life levels of the comparison group declined 4%, but it was non-significant. Now, what does this 0.01 level mean? That's what statisticians use to figure out whether your study is, how valuable it is. And that means that if we had run this study 1,000 times, one of the times out of 1,000, these results would have been due to chance and not to the being involved in AgriAbility. We also measure their independent living and working levels. That is, I'm able to do my chores. I'm able to access my workspace. I'm able to access my home. The ILW levels increased in the Agribility group 28% at the .001 level, and in the comparison group, they increased only 8%. So that's just more detail on the 3 subscales that get to the behavioral health levels. Now, if you know a dairy farm family with some kind of a disability, it doesn't have to be the farmer or the spouse. It can be one of the children. It can be a grandparent. It can be anybody. Call these numbers, and you can go to this website, Fathallah, Fathallah at ucdavis.edu. Or you can call 800-477-6129 or 530-752-1613 to find out about Cal Agribility at ucdavis.edu. That's for people with farmers and ranchers with disabilities. So be careful out there. Take good care of yourselves. So now I want to go to questions and answers and open up the line for questions and answers. And while we do that, I'm going to first of all show you my email address, robert.fetch, F-E-T-S-C-H, at colostate.edu. If you have a question for me or last lines or stories you want to share with me, that's fine. 491-5648, area code 970 is my phone number. But I want to go now to Deanne and Denise and go back to this slide and open it to your questions and your comments about whatever it is you want to talk about. I'm here. I want to listen. We've got about 17 minutes left in this time, and I'd be glad to hear what you have to say.
Dr. Bob, this is Denise. We haven't received any questions at this point quite yet on the phone/text line. We'll keep you posted.
Okay.
So, Bob, I guess Deanne here, the common question people ask, and you kind of mentioned it, but maybe you could stress it again. Sometimes people are afraid to ask someone how they're doing because it's really personal, and they're worried that if they ask and the person's depressed, that they're triggering someone to consider suicide. If you actually say, are you considering suicide? Are you considering harming yourself? And could you clear up that myth for us, please?
Yes, that is a very common question that I get in many of my workshops, that I'm afraid to say anything to someone who looks depressed because I'm afraid I'm going to cause them to kill themselves. I've talked with many behavioral health therapists and psychiatrists, and I don't know of one case in my experience where that has triggered someone. If you do it in a careful, caring, respectful way, in other words, you say, Sally, how long have we known each other? 30 years? Right, we've known each other a long time, since high school. And I've always liked you. I've always enjoyed talking with you every time I've seen you. But lately I've seen you sound sad. You sound sad to me, and I care about you. I worry about you. I wonder if you're sad and depressed. You mind telling me? If you ask it that way, in a caring way, most of the time, in fact, all the times that I've ever seen it happen, they will just, particularly if it's in a respectful, quiet place where it's just the two of you, where there are going to be no interruptions, they will be glad that you care enough to ask them that question. And then they will either choose. If they don't want to share it with you, say, yeah, I'm going through a rough time, but I'm not ready to talk about it. If they say that, then you have to trust that they know what they're doing, and you can just say something like, well, I'm here and I'd be glad to listen. I worry about you, I care about you, and I want you to have what is best for you in your life. If they usually what they'll say is, yeah, I am sad. Boy, things are not going well. George is drinking again, and boy, I just don't know what to do. I'm feeling pushed, and I'm trapped. I don't know where to go, and I'm worried about the kids, and they'll go on and they'll tell your story. If you just listen without judgment, no judgments, just listen and care and lean forward in your chair. Don't lean back in your chair. Oh yeah, tell me your story. That's the wrong way to do it. You gotta listen and you go. You sit up and you listen, lean forward to them and listen that way. And you listen with your eyes, your ears, and your whole body, heart, mind, and soul to hear their pain. And then you can reflect what you hear. Okay, let me kind of tell you what I think I'm hearing you say, Sally. I think you're saying you feel trapped, you feel sad that your husband is drinking again, and you're worried about what's going to happen if he doesn't get the crops in, and if you don't get the milking done and everything. Is that right? You can just kind of summarize it in your own word and then say, is that right? And usually that'll get them to say some more. And you're there mainly to listen. And then if you get to the point where you think Sally is pretty depressed, you might ask her, you mind me asking on a scale of 0 to 10 how depressed you are, from 0, no depression, to 10, high depression? And she says, well, it's at a 6. Okay. It's at a 6, so it's kind of close to the middle. So are you thinking about hurting yourself or killing yourself? Oh, no. I've thought about it in the past, but I don't feel, that's not where I'm at now. I'm mostly just mad at him. Okay, so you're angry. Okay, tell me about that. So sometimes it'll go that way. But sometimes if she is depressed, if she says, I'm at a 9. Okay, you're at a 9. So it's pretty serious, and you're feeling pretty depressed right now. Do you have a plan of some kind you want to do it? Oh, I don't know. I thought about parking the pickup on the railroad track. Okay. Sally, I'm worried about you. I want to talk with your husband. I want to involve your family member, your mom, your dad, whoever's around that you can get involved with it. Or if not, then you talk about if you're willing to take her to the emergency room, or to the physician, or to a counselor, a mental health counselor, behavioral health therapist. If you're willing to do that, you can do that. Now, some people advise not to do that because of liability issues if something happens along the way and there's an accident. If so, what you can do is you can stay with them until you call 911 or call the local resources and have them come and pick Sally up and take them in, or call 911 or call the hospital to have them come, or call a family member, but stay with them so that you can care for them and listen to them, etc., as long as you can. Or if you're on the phone with them, you can do it that way too, and use your other phone to call 911 to get the sheriff or someone to come to the house to transport them to emergency behavioral health therapy. So in answer to your question, if you see signs that make you feel like I ought to say something, then do so. But do it in a caring, respectful, non-judgmental way that shows that you care about that person and that you want to listen to and hear their pain and their suffering, and then get them to professional help.
Thank you, Bob. We do have a couple questions that have come in. We'll start with the first one. How can family members care for their own mental health when they are caring for a family member that is known to have had thoughts of completing suicide?
Excellent question. How can a family member take care of him or herself, when they're caring for another person who has had thoughts about suicide? That is extremely important, that you take care of yourself too. And you can do it in little ways. If you're as you walk from one room to the next, take a breath and walk and say to the universe, if you have faith, ask for help. What can I say? What can I do? As you walk to the bathroom, give yourself 3 minutes in the bathroom where you get some alone time, where you can take some deep breaths and take care of yourself for 3 minutes. Do little things like that. Eat healthily. Eat an apple instead of cookies or cake. Eat a carrot instead of having another beer or bourbon or vodka or tequila or something. In most rural settings that I've worked with, the drug of choice is alcohol of one kind or another. It's just a legal one as opposed to an illegal one. But ask yourself, what do I need now? Mm-hmm. And if you'll ask yourself that question and wait for the answer, it'll come. It's within you to know that. Well, I need some rest. I need to lie down. I need to get some help here to watch this person that I'm worried about. I need someone else in the room who can take care of them. So call a brother, call an uncle, call an aunt, call a sister, get a husband, get someone in there who can be there while you take a little break. Eat well, get exercise, and if you're depressed too, seek help for you. And remember what I told you, the best help for any of us who are depressed are antidepressant medication, exercise, good diet, and counseling. And get counseling for yourself if you need it. That's important. While you're getting help for you, and if the thing I said earlier was, if we don't take care of ourselves, we can't take care of somebody else. We're going to wind up in trouble too. Okay, that'd be my answer to that question.
That's wonderful, Bob. It's always a good reminder to have permission to put ourselves on our own calendar every day to take care of our mental health. We do have another question here. If someone can understand or rationalize how another farmer could commit suicide, does that mean that they're actually suicidal? The individual who's doing the rationalization?
In other words, I think your question is, okay, if I can understand how someone else can commit suicide, does that make it easier for me to commit suicide myself? Is that what
Right.
you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. I suppose that could be, but usually I've found it the other way. If I can understand how someone else would commit suicide, what it means that I've learned that instead of being judgmental about them, I know that they have come down to one solution. We started out with 180 degrees of solutions when we live healthily, and it gets narrower and narrower to where we get down to one. And that one is, I think, taking my life is the best option for my situation. When we get down to that place, we definitely need help, because it's going to take help from outside of us to help us see another option, a way that we might get some help from a behavioral health therapist, a way that we might reach out to maybe Alcoholics Anonymous or to a church group or to some other support group that's in our community that we like, or to a friend. You know, although social isolation has been recognized as a sign of problems among many isolated farmers and ranchers, in my experience, I've found that most of them have one or two neighbors or friends or brothers or brother-in-laws or sister-in-laws. They have somebody with whom they can talk. And I like to make these signs of high stress, anger, depression, suicide known, especially to the women in the family. When I do my workshops, I really strongly try to get couples or families, 2 or 3 generations into my family, into my workshops, because I don't mean to be sexist or anything. I'm just saying, I think in my experience in Colorado, Wyoming, Kentucky, and Texas, that most of the time it's the women that are more in tune with these kinds of behavioral health issues than the men. Not always. Some men are tuned in, and thankfully that's increasing, I think, as we pay attention to these things, and we make it okay to talk about depression. As you said in your introduction when you introduced me, that some people are beginning to make this known, that it's okay to say, I have been depressed, and I learned better ways to deal with it, and I don't want to kill myself. Yeah, life is too fun for me to do that. I think by getting these checklists and all to the women in your family, and to the men if they're willing to take a look at it, or put it on the refrigerator with that magnet on it so it's, people can see it and then talk about it in one of your family meetings. So I suppose that can happen if the person who is thinking of, if both people are depressed and suicidal, yeah, they might have, maybe they thought of something that a new way of doing it that they hadn't thought of. But I think that would be pretty rare. I think most of the time, if the person has any care at all for someone else, they are not as depressed as they will be when they get down to one idea. When I get down to the last idea on my list about how to solve the problem, and it is take my life, I'm not thinking of anybody else. I'm not thinking about how the blood is going to be a heck of a mess in the living room for my wife and my kids to clean up. I'm not thinking of that. Or I'm not thinking about that dadgum lender that I'm mad at because he didn't renew my loan. I'm not thinking about them. I'm thinking about me. I'm thinking about me. And so if you can help me think about one other person, 2 other people, 3 other people, my spouse, my family, my grandchildren, you can probably open up that door from one solution to 2 or 3 or 4 or 10. So that's my answer to that question.
Thank you very much, Bob. I think that's really appreciated. I don't have any other ones here in the chat box. Denise, do you have anything on the phone?
No, I sure don't. I haven't received any additional questions via the phone or text.
Good.
So in closing, as we bring this morning's webinar to an end, I just want to thank everyone for taking time out of your busy schedule and lives for participating in this morning's webinar. Hopefully you found some useful information included today. Also just want to let you know that we will continue to post resources and information up on the CDQAP webpage, specifically that link that we highlighted earlier this morning. And as you talk about this amongst folks in your life and circles, if there's people that are interested in watching the webinar, we will also be posting a recorded webinar up on that same website within the next few days. So with that, thank you so much, everyone, for participating. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.
Goodbye.